I'm joined today by someone who describes himself as an artist and a technologist. He's a passionate SEO speaker and a thought leader, someone who consults to brands like American Express, HSBC, and SanDisk. A man who's the founder of boutique digital marketing agency iPullRank. Welcome, Mike King.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always good to catch up with you, David.
Oh, great for you to be along here. Thanks for joining in. Well,
Yeah, no problem.
There's a slight echo in your sound there, Mike, actually, but hopefully it'll be all right there. So, so just before we think of the future, I mean, thinking of maybe the past few years, is there any like Google algorithm update or significant change to how SEO is done that maybe you didn't see coming yourself that surprised you a bit over the last few years?
To be honest, no. I mean, I think that, Google has been pushing us in the direction of actually doing marketing for a long time. And it's the type of things that like people would always say as an aside, like, in the future, this is going to matter more and things like that. So I think anyone who has been really focusing on like creating things that people actually want and promoting it through, multiple marketing channels rather than just thinking about link building, not much has changed. But if you were basically a spammer, then yeah, a lot of things have changed. You have to actually start doing marketing. So I don't think I've been surprised by anything. What I've been more surprised is how SEOs have kind of reacted to all this stuff. Us as SEOs have just jumped on the content marketing bandwagon so hard that we've kind of forgotten about the technical ends of what we do, that have remained important and have gotten even more important in the last couple of years. So I think it's interesting more to watch the psychology of the people in this industry than what it actually takes to get things done.
So do you think SEOs are now starting to accept that perhaps people in general reacted too much to perhaps scare stories and are reverting back to a greater focus on links and more traditional SEO practices now?
I mean, links themselves, I think we as an industry have just decided that like link building as a term is something that we don't want to be associated with so much. So everybody's doing content marketing as a form of link building. But I think where we're reverting as an industry is in the fact that we have to know a lot more technical things than we may have had to know before, because the reality is like the technologies of the web have evolved dramatically. You can't ignore JavaScript. There's so many different JavaScript frameworks out there that so many people are using, like React and Angular, Meteor, all these things. And as a result, the search engines have had to catch up with that. But in the meantime, there's been things that we as SEOs have had to learn to make it so it's easier for them to access our content. These bigger experiences with all these interactive capabilities and such are driven by those technologies. So it's been a lot more about us getting back to the things like accessibility and crawlability and all those technical components of that, rather than just, what's the trick of the day that we can use to rank.
So you mentioned a lot of SEOs started to focus on content marketing. Does that mean that SEO as an art form is fragmenting and it's quite difficult simply from a learning perspective to be able to be very successful at content marketing and technical SEO and perhaps things like user experience all at the same time?
I don't know that it's difficult. I think a lot of people have this siloed mindset. I mean, so from my perspective, I've been making websites since '95, right? And back then, there wasn't like a UX person and then like a front end person and a back end person. Like it was just webmaster. So for me, I've always been used to like doing all these different components of stuff. But people who came into working on the web later on, they're like, okay, there's this one thing I do, and then that's it. So there are definitely SEOs like that. There are definitely UX people like that, content strategists like that, and so on and so forth. So I think it's more difficult from a perspective that people has expected that their job would be the one thing, but I don't think it's difficult to do a lot of these things that we have to do as web professionals.
So you started designing websites back when you were 5 years old, then in 1995.
I was 14 actually.
Right.
My first job was a high school internship at Microsoft. My title was webmaster. I was on the ODBC and OLADB groups, and I did their internal websites, and then I did a couple external Microsoft websites as well. And that group ultimately became ActiveX, which was the technology that I guess no longer exists. That was kind of like competing with JavaScript and such. But yeah, I mean, then it was like I just did everything. I did the design, I did everything. And I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a good designer. Absolutely not. But, you know, I'm capable of a lot of these different things. And I don't think anything is so hard that, like, you know, if you're an SEO person and you come into a UX problem that you can't figure it out. And I think that the siloed thinking, which is problematic in a lot of ways, but siloed thinking really keeps people from trying to tackle some of these other issues. And it makes us all really inefficient. And I think for my team, you know, we try to get away from that siloed thinking altogether. And we really just, you know, a lot of people do a lot of what other people do. So, for example, my front end developer is also a designer. My UX UI designer also has a computer science degree. So, you know, they collaborate a lot better than if they were people that just did UX and just did front end development. So I think that, you know, that's something that I would love to see adopted across all types of companies, because it just makes us all better at doing our job.
That's interesting, because most people have been talking to so far in terms of the future and maybe looking forward 4 years, say, into the year 2020, we're viewing it as, well, it's going to become more fragmented and there will have to be greater specialization in each role. Do you think that's the case, or do you think that that's not necessarily going to be good to be successful in the future?
Yeah, I absolutely disagree with that. And I mean, of course I do, because I'm somebody that does a lot of these things. But I find that when you have these very specialized people, it's kind of a weakness, because all you can do is your specialty. Whereas when you have your T-shaped marketers, you know, they have a better understanding of what their piece of the puzzle does for the overarching picture. And so when we have all these people that, you know, again, just do one thing, it's very difficult for them to tee up their one thing for these other people. And then what you have to have is like somebody who sits over everything, but that person may not have enough of those skill sets to then bring it all together in the right big picture. So I find it better when people have those multiple skill sets, because it brings that collaboration into like more of a real time thing. Because again, my UX designer and my front end developer, when they work together, you know, my designer knows to build her design in such a way that it's going to be translatable to what my front end developer needs to do. And my front end developer can give insights on the design as it's being designed, or he can make the right decisions, like while the design is happening, or while his development is happening, to further inform what my UX UI designer needs to do. So I feel like when you have those complete separations of concern, what happens is the process becomes longer. It goes back and forth more than it needs to. And, you know, some people in that process may not still be as, they may not care as much when they get the project back the fifth time. You know, they may just be like, why are we still doing this? Whereas when you have the people that speak both languages, well, it's a lot easier for them to make the right decisions and make the project work a lot.
So from
more
a business perspective, do you reckon the average business owner will be more or less concerned with actively getting involved with SEO in the future in 4 years' time? Or, you know, are they going to think, you know, well, no, SEO is baked into my website's CMS and other things like that, so I don't have to worry about it too much?
I think it depends on the size of the business. So, the smaller the business, the more they want that all-in-one solution, the SEO baked into my CMS type of thing where they don't have to worry about it. But I think in bigger organizations, they're always going to be like, okay, how do we get more out of organic search? What does it take to get more, right? So they're always going to have that concern. But I think that Rand brings up a good point that, there's less people with SEO in their title, and then more people that are having SEO become part of their job function. So I think we're going to see more and more of that because people are going to get more value out of having people that, let's, again, going back to the idea of, oh, I have a content strategist. Well, my content strategist should be able to handle SEO. And they should, because largely what we do for SEO and the content end is make sure that we have a specification in place that people are following these best practices. And, your copywriter should be able to follow those best practices. So your content strategist says, hey, copywriter, write like this, adhere to this type of metadata, so on and so forth. And then your developers, primarily your front end devs, will have to, think about, okay, how do we build this in such a way that the site is as fast as possible? We're making sure we have all the schema.org code set up, so on and so forth, all those on-page best practices. So, and it goes back to something I think Adam Audette said a few years ago, good SEO should be invisible. And to that point, it's if you have all these other people who you just make these best practice things part of their job, then you don't necessarily need like an SEO manager. You just need, the people that are already working on your website.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love talking about baking the SEO cake. So SEO is baked into everything that you do, and hopefully integrated into your organization. Mm-hmm. What about some of the strategies that are working well now, but are unlikely to work as well in a few years' time? Can you think of some things that people should start thinking about seriously stopping doing now?
I mean, from what I've seen lately, it doesn't seem like much of that has changed. It's still around how people are approaching link building. And the reality of it is, like, despite what you hear in the SEO media, pretty much everything still works. Like, you can still do terrible forum spam, blog comments, yada, yada, yada. Like, I see link profiles with mostly just that working just fine. So the reality of it is that's what Google goes after. They're going to continue to go after this stuff, and it's going to continue to be your problem if that's the way that you build your links. So aside from that, I think it's really interesting where we are right now because of the fact that Google allows a lot of different things based on technology. And what I mean by that, what is cloaking in 2016 when they allow you to do a responsive or adaptive site, which can show different things based on different user contexts? Or also because Google adheres to the 304 response code, which means not modified, which means if you return this 304, that they think they've already downloaded this page, so they won't download it again. So again, this is a situation where you could be doing cloaking, and they allow this because they're following web specifications. So I wonder if at some point they're going to be like, hey, yes, we're following the specification, but a lot of people are abusing it. So why don't we reel this back? So I wonder a lot about that type of stuff. And I don't know, I think the main thing is just link building stuff, because people will continue to abuse whatever works at scale. Guest posting is still running rampant. There's a lot of people, a lot of services offering, links from Fortune.com and Forbes and all that right now. And at some point, Google is going to have to be like, look, like, you guys are just running rampant with this. And it's kind of funny because to some degree, I look at those sites, they're like respectable magazines in the real world, but like Forbes to me is a tabloid online, because I know like how this content is coming about. I know the sources that they're getting it from. I know that there's people just like paying whatever to get it up there, get their links, get the traffic, and so on. So I think at some point Google's going to have to make a decision on how they want to approach that stuff, and then also those publications need to like figure out what really matters to them. So I think it's a bigger picture thing that we need to think about here, not just like, how does this stuff impact SEO? How does this stuff impact these brands, and how does this stuff impact?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a challenge for these kind of brands because I've done SEO in the UK for a few years, and I am aware that quite a few big newspaper brands online have sold links or sold articles in certain sections of their newspaper, and these sections don't get any traffic at all, hardly, but because they're associated with the domain, then they are able to sell space for quite a significant premium there. And perhaps with the quantity of print copies that the publications are selling going down significantly, maybe they're trying quickly to build another source of income, and that's a business model challenge for them, certainly.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting because you can do like sponsored content as well, and Marty Weintraub did like a whole talk about this, where you can do sponsored content, and like the FCC rules say that if this content is sponsored, then the links need to also be like no followed and things like that. And all types of publications are not adhering to that, and Google is still allowing that stuff, to impact rankings and such. So when does that fix come about as well? And again, they have a really hard problem to solve, because how do you solve that at web scale? It's got to be incredibly difficult, because what markers are there to say that this is sponsored content and this is not? So perhaps they may need to think about, some sort of markup that whether it's schema.org, JSON-LD, or whatever, that says, this is a sponsored piece of content, and then they're just not going to count those links entirely. So there's a lot of specific problems that need to be solved around link building, and that's just like a problem that's never going to be.
I'd like to get a few thoughts from you about the future of web design as well, because we've seen a big change, obviously, in the last few years of people much more like to use mobile devices now. Does that mean that the most important aspect of the foreseeable future of web design has to be mobile led, or are there other areas of web design that people need to have an eye on as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do definitely need to be thinking mobile first. But I think even bigger than that, we need to be thinking about, all these other devices that are going to come out. This whole Internet of Things situation is going to make the screens smaller, screens bigger. It's going to make the browsers less capable. So Google's always said go after progressive design, or progressive enhancement, and I think that's going to become even more important, irrespective of mobile. Obviously, mobile is where everybody's at, but in the future, there's going to be just so much more devices, and we really just need to account for that now, because there's no telling what these new devices are going to be and how adopted they become. So the sooner you think about how do I make this as fast as possible, how do I make it responsive, how do I make it progressive, then the more future-proof whatever you're making.
So basically what you're saying is you need to drill down and determine exactly the user experience that you're trying to create at that particular moment to that kind of person, and then create your web design based upon that rather than your website as a whole.
Right. So, the bottom line is that there's more or less an infinite amount of context that you can't account for unless you're thinking about it from the beginning. So with progressive enhancement, you have to have a version of your page that works for the lowest common denominator. But if you're on a desktop, then sure, give me the AngularJS version. And it's difficult because a lot of these technologies aren't built with progressive enhancement in mind. So you need to make the right decision from the from the planning phase if you want to be valid for all these different concepts.
So what about social media and the way that impacts SEO at the moment, the way that might impact SEO in the future, and also Google's involvement with it, given that Google Plus isn't used by many? Do you think that there's a future for that, and might Google do something else in social media?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you have to think about with social media is that social media is far more reflective of, you know, the democracy of the web than links are at this point. You know, like it used to be, if you wanted to share something, you had your resources page on your blog, or not your blog, your website, and you just linked to the things that were interesting to you. But far more people have a social profile than have a website or a blog at this point. So the more relevant signal for something that's popular at this point is a like, a share, a tweet, or something to that effect. So I think that Google needs to figure out the best way to solve that problem, because right now they are looking at links and they're not indicative of the true democracy of the web. So I think that in and of itself tells me that they need to think more about how to use these social signals. And I think that them having the Twitter fire hose is a great step in that direction. I think really what they need to do is figure out how do they get a hold on these bigger social networks, e.g. Facebook, and get their signals in the mix, because there's just such a wealth of information on people, what they care about, what they're sharing, what they believe is important, that Google is missing out on. So I think that, like they always say, they may not actually be using these signals directly right now, but at some point they're going to need to, because otherwise it's just not reflective of what people are actually doing.
So do you think to stay as relevant in the future, Google will have to display more social results within its SERP?
I don't know if they have to display more social results. I think they need to take more social signals into account when computing the results.
So we're recording this live in Blab. We've got Thomas in the chat saying Google can't see a lot of what's happening inside Facebook. Do you think that Google would have to do some kind of deal with Facebook in order to understand everything that's going on, or is there enough information there for it to be able to incorporate what's happening there in its algorithm?
I mean, I think the way forward has kind of already been shown by Bing, because they have that, or they had that direct integration with Facebook. I don't really know where that stands right now, because who uses Bing? But but they had a direct integration that was being filtered into the search results, and also based on whether or not you were signed in, that would influence your results. So that's what I'm saying, like just taking more of those signals, not just like the volume of how things are being used, but also using those signals to further personalize results. So again, because there's so much data in Facebook, well, maybe they may find that certain results work better for certain demographics and psychographics. So that can make the results even more relevant to me, as they were trying to do with Google Plus. But because there's so much more data available in Facebook from a social perspective, using those different vectors can make the Google results even more relevant to every.
So do you think the future of trying to make your piece of content relevant and authoritative and ranked highly is associated with trying to get influencers and authoritative relevant groups on social networks discussing that piece of content?
I mean, yeah, I think that's the future, but irrespective of what we just talked about, because of the fact that getting relevant, popular people to share things is just fundamental to how promotion works. Period. People in different groups share things. Other people find it as interesting. They share it even more, so on and so forth. But I don't think that matters with regard to specifically social media. I just think that's like a bigger picture thing that you should always do anyway.
I'm wondering if you also think that user experience is going to be a more significant part of Google's algorithm in the future? And if so, are there specific elements within user experience that you think are likely to be specific signals within Google's algorithm?
Yes, I do think user experience is going to be even more important, but I mean, where are we drawing the line for user experience? Are we saying paid speed is part of user experience? Are we saying, you know, the heuristic for how things are laid out? Like, you know, where's that line drawn as far as what we're talking about? But either way, I think that user experience is going to continue to be important. It's going to be something that Google is going to look to measure to determine whether or not a result is the right result. So if we're measuring user experience by, you know, metrics like time on site, bounce rate, things like that, then yeah, of course, they're going to continue to use some form of those metrics to determine whether or not somebody is landing on the right page and they're finding what they're looking for. And we're talking about user experience as far as like ad placement and things like that. Again, absolutely, because Google is more about like, how do we get you to the right answer for your question, rather than like, how do we drive you to a page so somebody can monetize it. So absolutely, I completely expect that Google is going to add more UX features into the determinations of what makes sense.
And you talked earlier on about the importance of an SEO being comfortable with all aspects of the job. Do you also think that an organic marketer needs to understand what's happening in paid search and other forms of marketing as well to get the best bang for their buck out of what they're trying to do and really track the effectiveness of what they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the reality of it is, you know, a lot of users don't make a distinction between paid and organic search, right? And at this point where we have 4 paid results at the top, there's a lot of people that just don't know the difference. They're just like, oh yeah, it's the stuff at the top, it must be organic. And then the other thing is that when there's so much stuff above the fold and your number one organic result is like, you know, 1,000 pixels down, what does it matter if you rank number 1? So I really think that, you know, we need to rethink how we're reporting things, because if I tell you that you're number 1 in organic, but again, it's 1,000 pixels down on the page, well, that's just a vanity metric. Like, it doesn't mean you're going to get anything. Also with the feature snippet, which we're calling like position 0 now, you know, if we're not tracking that, then again, we don't have a good understanding of the SERP, and it's difficult for us to make the right decisions. So yes, I absolutely believe that we all need to understand paid and organic channels better and how they work together. And then also just from a perspective of, you know, paid social and display and things like that. Well, how can we use those channels to promote content to, again, help out organic search? And then also, how can we use, you know, things like retargeting to ultimately help us hit those goals? Because, you know, a lot of the traffic that you're going to get from organic search is going to be top of the funnel traffic. Of course, you can get, you know, lower funnel traffic too, but a lot of the traffic will be top of the funnel. So how do we use that to get more of our goals completed? And when you're just doing organic and you don't understand how things like retargeting work, well, then you may not suggest to your client that they should be doing that. So I think that at the end of the day, we're doing internet marketing, like whether or not it's SEO or you're doing paid or whatever, like we're all trying to meet some goal through this combination of channels. And the better you understand those different channels, the more value you can get out of whatever channel.
Great thoughts. Working. Okay, well, you've shared a lot of interesting thoughts with us today, but just to conclude, what would you say, just to summarize, businesses need to be thinking about doing now that will still be valid in the year 2020?
I mean, good marketing, you know, like it really boils down to the basics of marketing. Figure out who your audience is, what is it that they want, how do you create it at scale and make sure that it's, again, something that people will continue to want, how do you promote it, and how do you make it accessible to all the context, whether that context is a search engine or to, you know, some phone that only has a screen that's like this big. I guess people at home won't really see me, a screen that's pretty small. So the bottom line is that, yeah, I don't think things are going to change too much as far as what we do. It's just going to be the mediums in which we do them and the channels in
I
which
love that
we
word
promote.
context that you're using, understand the context of your user. Great.
Yeah, I do context marketing, not content marketing.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. Where can our listeners get hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at iPullRank on Twitter, pretty much every social network. And then we're also iPullRank.com. We got a blog. We're happy to work with awesome people that want to do great things. So feel free to reach out.
Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.